And on behalf of our hosts, I'd like to say welcome to everyone. Today's topic, as everyone knows, will be how COVID-19 is changing and will change the design, planning, and operation of our global supply chains. A couple of words before we get started with our guests and with our content. A little bit about Q&A. We will not have a specific Q&A session in the agenda, so please ask any questions that you have during the course of the conversation. You can do so in two ways. You can write your question by going into the Q&A button and typing the question, and we will see those. You can also raise your hand virtually at the bottom of your screen and ask to be given the microphone, and we can join you to the conversation here with the panel. Either way is fine, and we'll try to get to your questions in the course of the conversation. So again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us to take part in this important conversation. Before we begin and I introduce our guests, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Kumar Mallampalli, who's a partner at Alvarenga IT, to say a couple of words on behalf of our sponsors and hosts. So Kumar, over to you, please.
Thank you, Carlos. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this session. We guests across 20 countries and 14 different time zones. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'll just take a couple of minutes of your time talking a little bit about Alvarenga. We are a company based out of Germany. We are present in 5 countries and we have delivered solutions to customers. We provide business solutions in SAP and R. We also provide edge computing solutions using surround IT of Microsoft technologies for last mile connectivity and interconnect of systems. We also do manufacturing and supply with our sister company, Protima Lotrex, based out of Germany. I'd just like to take a couple of minutes talking about a specific product of ours, which is extremely relevant in not just for today's session, but also for the overall prevailing circumstances around COVID-19. Our Merlin strategic sourcing solution has been used in the recent past in a couple of customer situations very effectively. The first one is a large automotive supplier based out of North America. They had 2 urgent and immediate requirements. The first one was, of course, to identify risks across the supply chain, quickly identify suppliers who had been put at risk because of the lockdowns that were in place. And the other one was to find out quickly if they can improve their cash flow situation using Merlin in some way. So the first one they achieved by quickly going through their huge supplier base and identifying plants that were impacted and either moving production to alternate plants or moving some of the load to alternate suppliers. And the second one was to look at payment terms across over 12,000 plus suppliers and identify where they were unfavorable and fine-tune them. This entire exercise was achieved in less than 3 weeks. And under normal circumstances, something like this would probably be an annual exercise taking 5 to 6 months. The other situation in Europe was fairly similar, large multi-site, multi-country operation, which needed to quickly identify potential spend leakages or spend inefficiencies. And again, this was made possible because of the AI and fuzzy logic search, which was implemented in our analytics engine to quickly identify similar but different, cost patterns or items or payment terms, and do a detailed analysis and break it down and then eliminate inefficiencies. Both these situations, it was done in a dramatically short period of time. The second situation took less than 10 days. So Merlin was used effectively to overcome, react quickly, impact the bottom line, and also de-risk the entire operation. I'd like to just leave these thoughts with you. If you need to know anything more about Merlin, do visit the landing page, www.reincs.com/Merlin, and we'll be happy to help you with any further information. That's it from me. Thank you very much, and please enjoy the session. Back to you, Carlos.
Thank you very much. Well, as we begin, let me start today by welcoming our guests. I'll start with Linda Dunn of Georgetown University, Wolfgang Lehmacher, and Joerg Pirron of Protima. And let me ask each of them, starting with you, Linda, to please introduce yourself to the audience. If you please tell us a little bit about your background in supply chain and also your current role professionally. So thank you very much. Linda, please start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Carlos. So as Carlos just shared, today I am the faculty director at Georgetown University School of Continuing Studies in their Masters of Supply Chain Management. Prior to that, I really have industry background, and my most recent tenure was with HMS Host, who's a leading provider of restaurant solutions really in the travel sector. And I was the vice president of supply chain and quality assurance. So that was quality assurance both for suppliers, as you would expect, but also for the food service operations. So that gives me a little bit of a unique perspective. And you had the food safety across the board. In that role, I had the areas of procurement, distribution, category management. Even prior to supply chain, some roles within HMS Host included financial planning and analysis. I have a finance background. Also included roles in revenue optimization and pricing. And other industries included telecom and banking prior to that.
Great, thank you. And today you join us from Washington, D.C. Thank you, welcome. Wolfgang, let me turn over to you. Please, introduction of yourself to the audience.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Carlos. Yeah, my passion in my life is supply chain and logistics over decades. I'm a board member and advisor today, partnering with startups, asset owners, and corporates across the world, working mainly on innovation, expansion, and transformation. At this point, I'm working with some 10 companies stretching from Asia to Europe to the US. I'm also a judge of the IATA Air Cargo Innovation Awards and the Automotive Logistics Awards Europe. I'm a member of the Logistics Wizen, a think tank under the patronage of the German Federal Ministry, BMWI, and I'm part of the Global Expert Network of the World Economic Forum. I'm a founding member of the Center of Excellence for Global Emerging Supply Chain Technologies in Singapore. My professional background is that I was director, head of supply chain and transport industries at the World Economic Forum, partner at the global strategy firm CBA, president and CEO, Geopost Intercontinental, the global expansion and investment vehicle of French La Poste. And prior to La Poste, I was holding senior positions at the global integrator TNT, including head of Eastern European and Eastern Mediterranean regions, and country general manager Switzerland. In all of these roles, it was always about driving innovation and expansion through various means. And I'm excited to join this discussion today because I think that it's very timely, as supply chain management has never been as important as in this critical moment of economic rebound.
Thank you, Wolfgang. I believe you join us today from Hong Kong, which is your base. Welcome. Joerg, please.
Thank you very much, Carlos. My name is Joerg Pirron. I'm a managing partner of Protema, which is a consulting company based in Stuttgart, Germany, with about 100 employees. And Protema has a proven track record in different industry regarding supply chain design and supply chain management and operations. I'm working now for more than 30 years in the area of supply chain design and management. First of all, I started my career in the field of research with the Fraunhofer Society in Germany, where we also developed supply chain management tools and systems. And after that, I was a director at the Supply Chain Council, and now I'm a board member of the German Interlogistics Network. Currently, in my consulting area, I'm working as an expert and consultant in digital transformation areas, especially in the, what we call in Germany, Industry 4.0 topics, with a strong focus on digital supply chains and supply networks.
Well, thank you, Joerg. Thank you, everyone. Linda, let me pose the first question to you, and we'll get started. I know you've had recent conversations with lots of different executives around the world about what has happened in the last sort of month or two. My first question to the panel is, what's your assessment of the impact that COVID-19 has had? We've heard lots of different stories, read lots of different things, but how do you personally see what has happened in the last month or two around the world?
Sure. So this has been quite a shakeup, right? The impact has been dramatic across all the industries, and many of you have read the reports. It will show, you know, the percent change in sales and impact. Every industry is impacted, a few to the better, but again, a surprise. So this has been an amazing shock to the system. And I think a lot of companies, the contingency plans they may have had were a little bit dusty, I would say. So they hadn't done even, maybe they've thought through or had a contingency plan, maybe not done simulations though, of actually walking through it. And certainly not to the degree that we have seen. So for some industries, this is, you know, hospitality, food service. It's really been a dramatic effect for them.
Wolfgang, let me put the same question to you from your viewpoint in Hong Kong and look around the world. How do you assess what's happened to these global supply chain operations in the last month or two?
Yeah, overall, I can elaborate on what Linda said. We have experienced a simultaneous supply and demand shock, and I think that was very special. At the beginning, when people heard about a new coronavirus, they thought about supply out of China. But what in fact happened was that the first warnings came from companies like Starbucks, because they closed half of their shops in China and feared the revenue impact. We have seen a decline of economic activity across the globe, also something which is very new at that magnitude and impact level, because 2008 and 2009, there were countries which buffered the shock much better, but this time it's a very simultaneous development. But the organizations feel this in very different way. I cluster them in three groups, very simple, in fact. And the group of those who are struggling, those who are just coping, and those who are thriving, because we have industries like hospitality that has a significant dip, but we have also industries like health, like grocery, where we see upside. So if I look at the companies I'm working with, to give some examples, I have a company which is in a B2B environment in Spain I'm working with, and there we have that lockdown, which is massive, and our suppliers and clients have just shut down. So there is not a lot you can do. There is no supply chain anymore in that business. Then I have a California-based software as a service business, which is providing tech solutions to manufacturers, brands, retailers. And there we have some disruption, some equipment is stuck, for example, in Delhi customs. But one of the major hurdles is that we cannot deploy the devices because we have a hardware component to it. Then I'm working with a platform which connects in the Netherlands, which connects small shippers with small truckers. Very interesting. Records every month from January, February, March, because smaller players look for newer solutions and open up to the digital age in a way we have not seen before. And maybe a last aspect to add is the sustainability angle, because a lot of people are discussing whether COVID will put a break into the momentum which had been created in some countries before. I'm involved in an online shop with no waste, and we see tremendous demand. So at least from the consumer side, there is an interest in sustainable supply chain. So it's a mixed bag, and supply chain shift the one way or the other.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Joerg, same question to you, please. Your viewpoint.
Yeah, thank you again. So what we see, and I agree on that, we see significant challenges for the global supply chains. And not only in one area or two areas, it's on both sides, on the demand side and the supply side. On the demand side, because, speaking from Germany, because of all these lockdowns we have here, and we have industries like event organizers, fair organizers, their demand decreases to nearly zero. And we have others where we have a significant a decrease in business, and we have some industries like food industry where we have even an increase. But we have changes and challenges in all areas of the supply chain, in demand side, supply side, and also in logistics and transportation. And especially the supplier or the supply chains are hit very, very hard, which have a high dependency on China to fulfill their demands for example, for raw material parts or components. And if you imagine 200 out of the global Fortune 500 have a presence in Wuhan area. So they have a problem because they do not get any parts out of China. And they cannot produce anything, even if there is a demand for them. And we have limited transport capacities, for example, regarding air freight. We have big problems to get the parts around the world. And these are the challenges for the supply chains. But based on these challenges, my perception is that most of the industries, and by the way, also the countries, they are not really prepared for such kind of a crisis. Mm. This is for me the interesting or the most interesting part of it. We have limited transparency throughout the supply chain. We have limited flexibility and agility to cope with such kind of shutdowns or closed plants in China. We have a lack of coordination within the industry and within the countries. And we have a lot of problems with regard to limited cash flows in the companies, though they have not been prepared for such kind of a crisis. The mitigation strategies, the risk management strategies, they didn't cope with this kind of problems.
Joerg, let me follow up on that question. One of the critiques we've read in the last, especially in the last couple of weeks, has been a lot of supply chain models and organizations as systems were organized for a node or for a part. But when you looked at it at the macro level, either at the systemic level or at the national level, they were not prepared. So right answer for one level, wrong answer for a second level. And it's been leveled as a critique to the way some of these models were set up. Do you think that's a fair critique, or do you think someone's missing a key element of this discussion?
No, I think this is a fair critique, because if you look at the past, most of the supply chains in the past were optimized regarding cost efficiency, reducing inventories, and such kind of things. So, and based on this cost focus, you do not have any flexibility within these supply chains. You cannot cope with the risks. You do not have some kind of reserves to cope with such kind of risks. And therefore, it's a very one-dimensional design and management of supply chains, which we experienced in the past. And this is also what we have to do better in the future. We have to think about a more dimensional design and management of our supply chains, and we have to think about a development into supplier networks.
Linda, let me pose the same question to you. In the US, where this has been an especially harsh critique, again, of the systemic versus, let's say, subsystemic way in which some of these operations are organized. What's your take on this phenomenon?
Well, I would agree. It definitely, well, companies were looking to optimize, or maybe even hospitals, it was not done enough at a larger level. And what I would say, when you look at companies, what's interesting, a lot of those contingency plans look within their own industry. what this has caused is for people to really say, okay, my plans need to be much broader than that. I need to look across industries, and even coordination at the industry level, I think, has changed. So coming together as a group sometimes, but then again, maybe retail and food service, we saw this imbalance, right? You had warehouses full of product on the food service side, but not there in retail. So better cross industry in both the planning and then execution. And certainly companies stepped up and started doing that, but the original plans probably didn't look across industries as much. And then I would say also, when you look at a national level, more public-private partnerships that could really create the visibility and the plans that would cross over from public and private. That seemed to be where it got stuck. Everything, was either public and addressed publicly, but then what was really happening? What did the particular hospital or a particular state, what did they look like in terms of supplies, inventory? Having that full visibility wasn't there.
Wolfgang, same question to you. What's your view from Hong Kong?
Yeah, I have. I agree with some points, and I have a bit of a different view on others. I agree that with both that many were not ready for this, and it is a bit of surprise because there were a lot of voices and a lot of reports out that would come. On the other hand, I think that it's very hard to make an overall comment and judgment here. There are, from my perspective, companies who have a good grip on their crisis management, on their risk management. Companies which operate today at 75% capacity, not because their contingency plans don't work, but because they do physical distancing in the factories. And just that was something which we might have missed and not thought about, that we design also backup plans for manufacturing in times of crisis. Where I agree with the systemic view is when it comes to what Linda mentioned, it's when the public and the private sector come together. In light of such a risk which we were facing, and it was there. We had Ebola, we had MERS, right. We had SARS. It's not that this is a very new thing, but we were lucky. Ebola was at a place which was not that well connected, right? MERS, though, was already pretty large. H1N1 was even larger, 142 countries, right? So this is not new. And therefore, we should have a more global systemic view and systemic approach to it, but I don't think that the geographic discussion is the right one, because we have a global crisis. Whether I was in Korea or in China or in the Philippines, it had hit me anyway, or in India, or so that's not the solution. It's more about the general resilience, how Yossi Sheffi calls it, right? Which companies have to develop. And just an insight out of a company I'm in contact with, it is 50% of the contingency plans that worked and that were usable, but 50% not, because there were always new aspects. And it's not only about you, it's about the entire ecosystem. It's about you depend on the other players. What is, of course, also a takeaway out of the discussion I had is that those people who stayed, for example, with their manufacturing within regions, within the European region, which in the Asian region had an easier play. Asia comes first out of the tunnel, so you can ramp it up in a more synchronized way. Europe is a no-border, theoretically, I can speak about that as well, but no-border environment where things flow much easier, and the same as North America. So these are my views on systemic, yes, but it is not that we have screwed it up completely. We have learned in the past, and there are much more factors from my perspective which come into play than systemic versus non-systemic, linear versus digital, etc.
Wolfgang, let me ask a different question. Anyone who's worked in supply chain as a professional or as a technologist or as an advisor in the last 20 years knows that one of the top of mind issues has been visibility, control towers, right? Better understanding of your environment. And yet what's been striking has been how much people have said, I lack visibility, I don't know where things are. So and it seems striking that probably where companies have invested, I would imagine, a tremendous amount of money in the last 20 years, or certainly the last 10 years, and yet it's the thing that they seem to be struggling with. Do you think that it's they didn't go far enough, or they maybe were not as well directed as they could have been in some of these investments? What's your take on that? Or just simply the technology isn't where it needs to be yet?
First, what comes to my mind is there are three dimensions of visibility, if I may. The first is the visibility on my shipments, my goods in transit, and my inventories. That's one. The other visibility is on my supplier base, which is the whole topic around supplier mapping. Do I know my tier 1, tier 2, down to the raw material providers? And then the third is the ecosystem visibility, which is around big data and analytics. So if I look at all the three, mapping is a classic, but it's a very cumbersome process. So, and there are companies who are really good in mapping out their supply chain, and I expect that there we will see improvements with more technology, but the technology is still not yet there. That has significantly improved, but not yet there. Then we look into the big data, the ecosystem. There we talk about machine learning, etc., artificial intelligence, deep learning. It's a very old topic, and we are at the beginning of the AI age from my perspective. Mm-hmm. And then we come to the visibility on assets on shipments, and I think this is the IoT driven solution space, and that's where we are in fact now in swing. But if you look at the prices of sensors, they have dropped significantly, and they will continue to drop. So this is a bit like the RFID story. Mm-hmm. We talked about it 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, a lot, nothing happened. But over time, it just became a reality. So with COVID-19, there will be a significant push on innovation, on prices, which will definitely bring progress there. Mapping will also improve, and some people might have neglected a bit their mapping, and will restart the exercise. And AI, yes, there are some good examples, people who have built effective tools around that, and there are data service providers in the space. So my answer is more towards your final assessment. The technology was not fully there, the price levels are not there, and companies, because of the stretch, cannot afford to invest that much money in very expensive technology, which might also not make it at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. So we are at a critical point there, and in fact, if you want to have a positive out of a human tragedy, there will definitely be a push for innovation and more visibility. But the final comment is that it's not only about visibility, because we create an enormous data lake and data mountain. We need more intelligence things to that. So again, there comes the analytics in place, where we see currently a lot of startups working on this, and yeah, it's not only about visibility, it's about early warning signals. Right. It's about alerts.
Joerg, let me pass the question on to you. This paradox of probably there has been no more invested in or discussed topic in supply chain management circles and visibility in the last 10 years, and it yet seems to be the thing that everyone's struggling with right now, or at least one of the top things. How do you assess that phenomenon?
Yeah, let me just take on what Wolfgang said. I agree on most of the topics, but I want to add one thing. In the past, it's not only a technology topic, because if we think about a whole supply chain, and Wolfgang mentioned the visibility not only to the tier 1, but also tier 2 and raw material supplier. So it's not only a question of technology, it's also a question of trust, because sometimes not all players in the supply chain do want to have this transparency to their customers, for example. So we also to have a change in mindset. And at the moment we have we are in the area or in the time where we have new technologies in place. So in the past we have a lot of problems regarding different interfaces, different data models, different IT architectures, and so on and so forth. And it was a very big effort to get an integration with regard to company borders, or to get an integration across different companies and different nodes in the supply chain. So we are now in a situation that this will be much better in the future, and is already much better. And if we now change and we have a little bit more trust and we give the transparency, then we get the visibility which is needed to take reasonable decisions, and because transparency is the basis for all of our supply chain management optimizations we talk about. If you do not have the transparency, you will not be able to have the flexibility and agility you need in your supply chains. So, for example, Kumar mentioned the Merlin system. So Merlin is exactly doing what Wolfgang mentioned. Merlin, with this Merlin platform, you get visibility throughout the whole chains of your supply network. You get the visibility about your supplier base. You get the information about your suppliers. You get you can assess your suppliers. You can easily enhance your supplier base, or you can look for alternative sources. You have even supplier analytics that you can maybe in future establish an early warning system with regard to different criteria. So technology is now getting better and better, and we can use it to get this transformation done. Because I think we do not only have to install, or the solution is not only installing or establishing new technology, it's also, the solution is also to establish a new kind of supply chain design. So it has to be a network, because you have to have alternative sources. You have to have the flexibility to enhance your supplier base and to change your supplier base very quickly. And you need the support by technology to do that. And you need this, this trust and organizational development, that you work together, that you get a better degree of collaboration within the supply networks, and then you can do a more systemic approach. Then you have not only approach which is focused on one company or a company and his tier 1, it's tier 1 suppliers, then it's a more systemic approach. But this is a change in mindsets, and we will maybe, that will last for 2, 3, 4 years when we before we see really developments in this area.
Great, thank you, Joerg. Linda, next question to you. I read an interview with the CEO of a company that makes masks, and his comment in the Wall Street Journal was, last time, and you mentioned H1N1, Wolfgang, and then the last crisis, we were asked to really ramp up production. So we did. We went crazy and we made a whole bunch of masks. The virus and the crisis ended very quickly, or more quickly than expected. We were stuck with a whole bunch of things that nobody wanted. And so we quote unquote learned our lesson. When you think about this particular event, we're having the same conversation a year from now. what do you think really on the ground will have changed, if anything, when you look back at this a year later?
Sure. That's a big issue, right? The supply and the demand, and then it just dries up. And we're seeing that all across. So you see that with logistics. All of a sudden, with the truckers, there's huge demand for overtime, and then all of a sudden it dries up once the goods have moved. So this imbalance, it's a big issue within supply chain, right? It works really well when things are more normalized. So with something that's critical, I think that's a planning issue. What things do you need to have and what kind of commitments you can make? But I do think you'll start to see companies ask for volume commitments. So not just at will. And again, there's different contracts, different relationships. But if you're in a particular industry and you've had this happen to you where it's gone up, it's gone down, you're going to start looking for some type of commitment. And but to be more agile, even as a manufacturer, you also need to be looking at how do I bring things up and down? How do I ramp it up and down? There's been a lot of discussion of, will this come in waves? What do I need to do? So both on whether it's manufacturing, whether it's on logistics, anywhere in your supply chain, people are going to need to look at how do I bring it up and how do I bring it down more easily. And then also there will be commitments that organizations will ask companies to make to sort of level out that demand and make sure they're not investing, particularly with capital, something that will dry up later.
Linda, a follow-up question. When you talk to executives, do you get a sense that their view is, as bad as this was, I'm probably going to go back to what it was before COVID, more or less? Or are they really thinking, hey, a COVID-like phenomenon just has to be factored into the plan every 4 or 5 years going forward?
I think because no one knows the timing, that they're looking at how do I become more flexible. I think that is definitely within the plans of CEOs today, what they're looking at, because you don't know whether it will be 4 years, 5 years, 2 years, right? A big shock to the system. So this, again, will teach a lot of lessons. And I don't think people are looking at going back, right? I think people are looking at, one, even new markets, diversification, being more flexible. And then again, massive changes to maybe how they're operating, whether it's, simplification of SKUs. We've grown a lot of, in the quest for growth, people haven't always asked, what does the growth cost me in terms of risk and complexity to my system? And there's going to be more challenging questions in the C-suites as far as, okay, you want this, but how much risk am I taking on? How much complexity should an event, maybe not as large as this, but should this happen again? So there'll be a different set of questions that are being asked.
Thank you, Linda. Wolfgang, same question to you. We're having this conversation December of 2021. As you look around and the crises in the past, what has changed a year from now, do you think?
Yeah, building on what Linda said, I believe changeover will change. So the ability to produce on one line much more items and reduce changeover times. Ramp up, it's not a question of piling up stocks. It's a question of how fast can I build up the capacity. And I'm sure that some startups will jump into that space and work on this, and maybe not only startups. There is some shared commitment, and this is the whole story around protecting the ecosystem. So what will have longer effects is the arrangement between, for example, OEMs and critical suppliers. Either they take a stake or they buy stock for 2 years. So there is some kind of shared risk and responsibility or solidarity in everybody's interest. Then agility is a big story, and then that's the overarching headline to all what I said before. There is the big discussion around China. I believe, as I said, that it's not a real China problem, but some people might, due to a bundle of reasons, now consider China +1 strategy and say, okay, China is very attractive, but I need a second leg. So that will be one thing which is different. Digitization and automation, we will see much more of that in line with what I mentioned when you asked me about visibility. So there will be a push, and the software companies I'm working with and I'm in contact with, they confirm that there is high demand for new digital products. Automation, we haven't seen that much an uptake in many areas, but I think we are also at a critical moment, similar to AI, and the two things are somehow linked because you need good AI to run autonomous vehicles, at least in an uncontrolled environment. So we will see more in that space because of the fact that people say, okay, we might wish to reduce labor and robots don't get infected. And finally, a big thing will be remote. The biggest for me thing, and maybe because I'm an individual living this period, is the remote working. And there will be a lot of innovation. And we will have it from a just access point of view and functionality point of view, but also from a cybersecurity point of view, because working at home is much more vulnerable than working in an office in a very fenced Fort Knox type of system environment. So these are some of the developments I'm seeing. There's of course much more. I think also about the matchmaking, supply and demand. Linda spoke about that, which brings also flexibility to the whole global marketplace and allows to spread the risk across many countries, and not that each country starts stockpiling and at the end doesn't know what it has. And we are running into very different challenges.
Thanks, Wolfgang. Joerg, the question to you, again, we're talking about this phenomenon a year from now. What do you think is different? And someone posed a question from the audience, especially with respect to, let's say, again, that interconnectedness of a particular supply chain. As you think about a design, you now begin to realize, to Linda's point earlier, that you link to this and that links to that and that links to a national strategy. When you think about planning, especially in design a year from now, what's different?
I think many things have been said up to now, but I think really we will see really big changes in design of supply chains. It will not be any longer a more linear supply chain. We will have more, or we will see more flexibility of the companies to go not only for single sourcing, but for having a dual sourcing or multi-sourcing strategy. But it's not only to have a dual or multi-sourcing strategy, it's about flexibility. Because if I have one supplier in China and one sitting in India, I'm not on the safe side of the medal, because maybe China and India are the countries where the plants are shut down or closed. So I have to be flexible. I have to be able to connect to the suppliers on a global level, where the supply is still working, where the plants are still working. So I have to be more flexible. I have to know the market, where are these suppliers, and I have to be very flexible to change from one supplier to the other. So this flexibility will increase a lot. In addition to that, what we already have seen in the last 2-3 years, many companies go into the direction of an agile organization. So it's more not based on standardized processes which are fixed for 10 years or something like that. They're more coping with the different changing situations, and they are able to adapt to these changes. They can quickly adapt to these changes. They are also flexible with regard to their capacities. They can increase and decrease their capacities. That's also maybe a pooling issue, because if you have an industry which needs capacities and another industry which do not need the capacities, where you have a decreasing demand, if they pool the capacities, they can cope with these issues better than today. So we will have a change in flexibility, we will have a change in organization, we will have a big change with regard to risk management. I think we will have a better risk management within the companies. We will have a better risk management also in industries across different companies. So someone mentioned it before. I think the risk sharing opportunities will get into the mind of the people, and they will try to get risk sharing strategies in place. And then we have the technology point of view. We are in a very interesting time today. We have a lot of different technologies on the table regarding the digitalization of the processes, where we stand at the beginning of these technologies like AI, like analytics, and so on and so forth. And as I said before, you need the technology to get transparency within the supply networks and the supplier base. And with this transparency, then you can go for flexibility increase, you can go for an agile organization, you can go for optimizing the supply chain to get a resilient supply network, you get a flexible supply network. But technology, in brackets transparency, is the basis for that. Without that, you will not achieve these goals.
Cool, thank you, Joerg. Linda, last question to you as we look at the, wrapping up the session. As you think of reflecting the last month or so, what has surprised you? What thing did you expect to happen in this kind of, let's call it a crisis, right? Hasn't happened? What thing that you didn't expect to happen has happened? What has jumped out at you, especially as a supply chain professional and scholar?
Sure. So I would say what I didn't quite expect and was pleasantly surprised with was how quickly people, companies really pivoted into other markets that they weren't even in. That's something that normally would have a whole strategic plan, a long launch time. And you saw companies make brand new products in a different industry they didn't have before, whether it's something to help with the situation like hand sanitizer, or whether it was restaurants starting to sell toilet tissue. Which they did, and they figured it out. So it was very innovative how quickly companies could pivot into new markets, is what I would say. Not just their own, up and down ratcheting the demand and supply, but actually outside of their normal ecosystem.
Thanks, and Wolfgang. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please.
No. I was going to say, and the thing that probably I wish had happened, but haven't quite seen enough of, is on the people side. This we talk in supply chain so much about the product, but the people as well. So where you have these imbalances of demand and supply, I would see industries crossing over to connect their capacities better. So if you all of a sudden have a big demand for tracers, contact tracers, or for any other skill set, a company could basically come out and say, I'm now your employment company. With people maybe furloughed and having benefits but needing to work, there could be a shift in really the people, the human resource capital that could happen across industries to better meet demand and supply. And I haven't seen that happen enough.
Great, thanks, Linda. Wolfgang, question to you. What has surprised you in the last 2 months?
Yeah, first, what didn't surprise me, because Linda prepared the ground,
right.
the activity and the let's say ability to adapt to a crisis situation. And the supply chain sector has that in its DNA. Supply chain people are problem solvers. So that didn't surprise me, neither the discussion about China, neither the discussion about closed border. Everybody would use that for his agenda and push it, which brings me to something what's really surprised me, is to which extent we lacked the global coordination. And global coordination on a national policy making level or the guidance on a supranational level. We face a void of a standard for essential services. The strict stay-at-home mandates and the uncertainty around the exceptions cause that crews cannot replace other crews, that they are stuck, they cannot move to other assignments, they cannot go home. And despite the fact that national government and the US Department of Homeland Security has deemed what it considers essential workforces, it didn't work in practice. And so as flexible as manufacturing was at the end, and Joerg mentioned, as much we were lacking the capacity in the air, the free flow through critical infrastructure, the movement of people dealing with essential goods. And of course, it's linked to the complexity, and there the lack of system thinking comes into play. It's not plain vanilla, it's not black and white. One has to understand the system to understand the realities. And one surprise, because we haven't spoken that much about the consumer, one surprise to me was when I looked at the Statista survey, I think it was in March, where in average 65% of consumers indicated that a brand's behavior during the outbreak would have a huge impact on their likelihood to buy their products in the future. That came as a big, big surprise to me. And that is a call for companies to consider their moves during these difficult times.
Thanks, Wolfgang. Joerg, a couple minutes left. I'll give you the last word on what has surprised you over the course of the last 2 months.
Yeah, maybe I don't want to repeat all these things which have been mentioned. I want to add one. I was really surprised how quick the companies ramped up virtual team working. I was really surprised that that all the guys sitting at home in the home office and working in virtual teams, in virtual projects, and especially for me as a consultant, we have done a lot of these virtual workshops in the last 4 weeks. And we have done maybe 10% of this in the last year, and now we have 100% of virtual teamworks or workshops. And how quick the companies could ramp up an environment for virtual team working, and also to train the people for virtual team working. And this was very surprising for me, in addition what has been mentioned before.
And on that note, with time to close, you're exactly right, and we've seen the same thing, right, from our world, that the quick pivot to virtual, and we have another series of conversations on this topic. The sense is that this will now become part of how supply chain is running. I was talking to an executive today who talked about they had to move their S&OP process to virtual. They're a Latin telecom, and they're going to stay this way. They don't want to go back to the last model. So to your point, I think that this will become part of supply chain management. The virtualization of supply chain management, at least in some part, is here to stay and may even expand no matter what happens when people begin to go back to their previous models. So let me go ahead and close then, because we're at the top of the hour. I want to say thank you to Linda, thank you to Joerg, thank you to Wolfgang, thank you to our sponsors and hosts, Rheinbrücker IT. Thank you to all of you who joined us from everywhere in the world. Hope you enjoyed the conversation, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much.